Life is full of surprises that cannot be predicted, I thought, sitting in a tiny motel room completely alone with Jason. My husband Kyle had left for another city several months ago, and his absence had long been building tension within me. Of course, I missed him, but the problem wasn't just his absence. It was much more painful to feel his indifference and alienation. These lonely evenings were slowly eating away at my soul. How could I have known that a simple request to my stepson Jason to give me a ride to my father's would result in us being stuck together in this cramped motel? The single bed, dim light, stuffy air, all of it seemed like a harbinger of something I didn't expect and wasn't prepared for. At that morning moment, as I was about to leave the house, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. I was tense, but I still looked good. Despite the coldness in my relationship with Kyle, I still felt desirable, alive. But even these feelings had ceased to satisfy me. In the kitchen, Jason was finishing his breakfast when I called out to him. "You're heading to college soon, right?" I said, trying to give my voice a light sternness.
"But you need to drive better. Will you come with me to my father's?"
His mischievous smile appeared instantly, just like always. He was sweet, with a quirky sense of humor, but sometimes such a rascal.
"All right, stepmother,"
he said.
"But only if you tell Dad to buy me a better car for the summer."
"We'll think about it." I dismissed him sharply, inwardly hoping to finish this trip as soon as possible. But then I didn't know that the journey wouldn't be that simple. 2 hours behind the wheel, I'm sitting in the back seat, scrolling through my phone, and Jason is quietly humming some song, joking and laughing. And suddenly, a terrible sound, a hiss, and the car stalls.
"What's happening?"
I ask, trying not to show my fear.
"It looks like it broke down,"
he answers irritably, pulling over to the side of the road. We were stuck in a poor place. The phone signal was almost non-existent, and there was no one around. For 2 hours we argued, called mechanics, tried to fix the car, but in the end, we resigned ourselves. We would have to spend the night in a nearby motel. At the reception, while Jason was talking to the administrator, I stood behind him, clenching my fists in irritation.
"If Kyle finds out, he'll go crazy,"
I thought. But strangely, at that moment, it seemed unimportant. I just felt this night would change everything. When we entered the room and opened the door, my expectations collapsed. The room was tiny, barely enough space to turn around. One bed, a nightstand, and a dim flickering light that made everything around look dirty and gray. This mocking tone and his smile irritated me, but at the same time they evoked a strange, thrilling feeling inside. I didn't want to admit it, but the thought of spending this night with Jason didn't seem so terrible. "This heat is killing me," I said, touching the back of my neck. "I need to take a shower or I'll faint." "Do as you wish, this is your kingdom." He threw himself onto the bed, stretching out to his full length. I glanced at him, lean but muscular, with a youthful, mischievous smile. A thought immediately flashed through my mind. He's Kyle's son, my stepson. But for some reason, I couldn't shake off the strange excitement. Deep down, I understood. Jason was already 22, an adult man, and I was 47. And here we were, stuck in this cramped room, alone with each other, as if on the brink of something forbidden and unpredictable. As I stood under the shower, the water washed away not only the heat, but also the tangle of emotions that had been building up inside me. I tried to suppress the shiver, not to let fear and strange excitement take over. But thoughts of Jason, his smile, his light, carefree gaze gave me no peace. I tossed and turned on the bed, feeling how the heat of the small motel seeped into every cell of my body. The silence was so thick that it seemed to press down on me, not allowing me to breathe or think. Jason lay beside me, and in his even, calm breathing, I tried to find at least a drop of my own peace, but in vain. The night was too hot, and it seemed that this heat was burning not only my skin but also my soul. I peered into the darkness of the room, where shadows danced on the walls under the light of a dim lamp, as if playing with my thoughts. We were here, in this tiny room, squeezed and confined by four walls, but in reality there was a much more insurmountable barrier between us, invisible, elusive, but impenetrable. Why can't I just leave? I grumbled to myself, feeling how the tension inside me was growing incessantly, turning into an almost physical pain. This whole situation seemed wrong from the very beginning. Jason was my husband's son, almost the same age as my grown son. Who was I to him? A stepmother? Just a roommate? But inside me, something was burning that defied logic and common sense. I slowly turned to him, trying to catch at least some hint of his thoughts. His eyes sparkled in the semi-darkness, deep, thoughtful, filled with something that was not just friendly or familial warmth. There was a spark of desire that I tried so hard not to notice. He noticed my gaze and smiled quietly, almost shyly. "You're not sleeping?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the same sleepless night. "No," I answered, trying not to betray the tremor in my voice. Too hot, too many thoughts. Jason turned closer to me, and his presence became more tangible, almost palpable. I felt as if a mixture of fear and strange attraction was exploding inside me.
"You know," he began, as if trying to find the right words,
"these moments, they're like a mirror. They make you see what we've been hiding for so long." I nodded, although I wasn't sure I understood what he meant. My thoughts were racing between memories, doubts, and that dark, forbidden feeling that grew with each minute. "Are you afraid?" I asked, almost in a whisper. He looked at me, and something vulnerable, real, flashed in his eyes. "I am. But I'm more afraid of not trying to understand myself." Our hands accidentally touched, and this touch made me shudder. It seemed as if time slowed down and the whole world shrank to the size of this room where we stood on the threshold of something unknown. "I know there's a barrier between us," he continued, "but what if this barrier is just fear?" I closed my eyes, trying to drown out the noise in my head, to calm my wildly beating heart. But inside me, everything was only burning brighter. I struggled with myself, with desires that I didn't dare to admit. "We can just pretend it's not there," I muttered, "but I know it's not true." He came even closer, and I felt the warmth of his breath on my skin. There was something simultaneously terrifying and alluring in this closeness. He carefully ran his finger along my arm, and at that moment I realized I could no longer pretend. "You can't imagine how much I want this," he whispered. The words hung in the air like a challenge that I couldn't help but answer. A fire mixed with confusion and desperate hope flared in my eyes. "What's next?" I asked myself, unable to tear my gaze away from his. He smiled, but in that smile was all the seriousness of the moment. "Let's just not be afraid tonight." And I understood. This night would be the beginning of something that would change everything. The morning was unkind. The scorching sun seeped through the blinds as if trying to burn out of me the entire night and what it had brought. I lay almost motionless, feeling as if my body was being torn apart between fear and desire. Thoughts swirled in my head like a whirlpool, giving neither peace nor clarity. Jason slept beside me, and his face, softly lit by the morning light, seemed so calm and defenseless. But inside me, the tension was growing like a storm, ready to break free. I turned on my side and quietly, so as not to wake him, got out of bed. The feeling of guilt enveloped me like a dark cloud. I knew I was crossing invisible boundaries that had seemed inviolable. But deep in my soul, something else was pulling, not just curiosity, but a burning desire to understand myself and him. In the kitchen, I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to drown out the inner voice that whispered, "What are you doing? This is wrong." But at that moment, looking at the simple everyday things, I realized everything would never be the same again. His eyes sparkled with soft warmth, but there was also some anxiety in them. "You didn't sleep?" he asked, coming closer. No, I answered, trying to sound calm. Too many thoughts. He sat across from me, and we were silent for several minutes, as if afraid to break through this silence. I wanted to tell him everything I was feeling, but the words stuck in my throat. How to explain this hurricane of feelings swirling inside? How to talk about the fears that have haunted me since childhood, about the fact that I was afraid of losing myself in all this? Last night, he began but hesitated. It's hard for me to explain what I feel. I nodded, knowing that the same thing was happening to me. The internal conflict and fear of exposure made everything more complicated. We're playing with fire, I said quietly. But I don't think it's just a game. Jason looked at me intently, and determination appeared in his gaze. I know, he admitted. And, to be honest, I'm scared. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid of destroying everything around me. But sometimes it seems to me that this risk is worth it. My fingers involuntarily clenched into a fist, as if these words were breaking through the barrier inside me, awakening feelings that I was afraid to even think about. Have you ever thought that sometimes we are afraid, not of what surrounds us, but of what is hidden inside us? He asked, as if reading my thoughts. Yes, I answered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. And these fears can be stronger than any external obstacles. We looked at each other, and in that gaze was everything: fear, hope, and the desire to be understood. What to do next? I whispered. Let's be honest with ourselves, he suggested, without lies and fears. Just us, as we are. And at that moment, I realized this path would be difficult and unpredictable, but I was ready to take a step forward, towards the unknown, towards myself. The morning brought no relief. I lay on the hard motel bed, feeling the heat and anxiety literally pulsating inside me. The sun's rays pierced through the blinds, but instead of warmth, they seemed like cutting knives, burning out every thought. My eyes slowly opened, and the first thing I saw was his face. Jason was sleeping beside me, so peacefully and defenselessly, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything was boiling and trying to break free. I tossed and turned, trying to calm the raging storm of emotions: fear, shame, desire, and guilt, all intertwined in one unbearable tangle. Why couldn't I just accept this moment? Why was my heart torn apart by contradictions? I quietly got up, trying not to wake him. Every step echoed in my head like a loud verdict. In the motel kitchen, the smell of strong coffee somewhat soothed my nerves, but inside me, the wave of thoughts was still raging. He sat down next to me, not saying a word, and in the silence between us hung an invisible but tangible burden. You didn't sleep? He finally asked, his voice quiet, almost timid. No, too many thoughts, I answered, trying to sound calm, although my heart was beating so hard that it seemed it would burst out of my chest. We both were silent, as if afraid to break this fragile moment of sincerity. I wanted to tell him everything I was feeling, but the words got stuck in my throat. How to explain this hurricane of feelings swirling inside? How to talk about the fears that have haunted me since childhood? About the fact that I was afraid of losing myself in all this? Last night, he began, but stopped, as if trying to find the right words. It's hard for me to understand what's happening, but I feel that it's something more than just a coincidence. I nodded, and tears welled up in my eyes. We're playing with fire, I whispered, but I'm not sure I want to put out this fire. A spark appeared in his gaze, a mixture of determination and vulnerability. I'm afraid, he said, afraid of losing what I have, but even more afraid of never knowing what could have been. My hands trembled involuntarily. This confession, such openness, penetrated deep into my soul, making every fear, every doubt, every hope flare brighter. Sometimes the scariest things are those hidden inside us, I said quietly. We're afraid to be ourselves, afraid of the truth. He took my hand and squeezed it. Then let's be honest with each other, he suggested, even if it hurts. I looked at him and realized this path would be thorny. But next to him, I felt ready to go through everything: fear, doubts, condemnation. At that moment, we were not just two people. We were allies on the brink of change. But change is always a test, and deep in my soul, I knew ahead of us lay something that would change everything. Several weeks had passed since everything changed. Jason and I seemed to find ourselves in a parallel reality, a world where every word, every touch, every silence meant much more than ever before. In this new space, there were no clear rules or guarantees, only a fragile line between trust and fear, love and pain. I looked in the mirror, saw my reflection, tired but unbroken. Eyes filled with doubts and hope told their story. A story about how I learned to be honest with myself, about how scary it was to let go of the past and open up to the unknown. Jason stood in the doorway, watching me. His face expressed the same mixture of anxiety and determination that I had long seen in my own eyes. We were silent because words were unnecessary. Our dialogue continued at the level of souls. At that moment, I realized that we were both at a crossroads. Ahead lay many paths, and
I approached him and our hands intertwined. We didn't know what awaited us tomorrow, in a month, in a year. But one thing was clear: we had changed forever, and in this change there was strength. When we opened the motel door and stepped into the bright light, the world seemed both familiar and alien. The city bustled and lived its life, unaware of our internal battles and victories. We walked side by side, but each of us carried our own personal storm. I turned to Jason and asked, "Do you think a person can truly change their fate, or is everything predestined from the beginning?" He thought for a moment, and I will leave his answer unspoken because this question is for you, dear reader. What would you answer? Do you believe that we are the masters of our own lives, or is everything just a game of fate and circumstances? And if so, are you ready to risk everything to try to write your own story?